happening, gang? You are live back in the Secret Stash. I'm your host, Jesse Abanez, holding it down for all folks trying to get into or out of homes. That's my game, gang. You may not know, that's what I do my day job, actually, even though it is the middle of the day right now. At the Greenhouse Group, located right down here in the heart of San Diego. If you're in that spot, maybe you're looking to take advantage of some of these low interest rates. Inventory starting to kind of come back into the conversation a little bit. Might get some choices out there. Or maybe you're a seller that's still trying to catch the vapors of this big run-up that we've been at. You might want to know how much your home is actually worth. For all those questions and probably, I don't know, 11 in between, go check us out at thegreenhousegroupinc.com. We got some featured properties actually going up on the market this weekend. You're going to want to check those out. Top right corner of the site. Ask me any questions. Who knows? Maybe even a private tour might come out of this. Private tour? I don't know how I'm going to segue that into Airbnb, but we've got you guys locked and loaded with two heavyweights in the studio today, talking about, of course, my man Kyle Yaege, second time in the Stash Nation. So, Kyle, thanks for hanging out for HickmanRobinsonLaw.com. And then Charles Williams, always holding it down, because you got that little hybrid. You're like one part law, but then you got like a crazy numbers, like CPA kind of, and you're actually down at FriedmanBrandon.com, Friedman Brandon LLP. Thank you for hanging out in the Stash, Charles. Second time listener, long time caller.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Sounds good. Airbnb, gang, San Diego. 4 things you got to know right now about Airbnb. Who knows? Maybe this is a good cocktail party topic. Maybe actually you're using Airbnb right now on either side as a landlord, or you're maybe somebody who frequents and tries to skirt the whole hotel tax, we'll just call it, how expensive it is to get out of town nowadays. Unfortunately for Airbnb and everybody else included, they just had their first sexual assault case that surfaced on the news. I think it was on CNN, wasn't it?
Yeah, I saw it on a couple of different sources.
Yeah. I think that's where it broke yesterday. And then we're getting into how this thing is kind of showing up for this locally. So individual issues like neighbors versus each other, leaseors versus leasees. What about the HOAs, gang? Charles, I'll start with you.
Well, I just wanted to touch on one other group of people that should be interested in this, is someone going on vacation. Like, if you're going to go on a vacation, why not fund your vacation with a Airbnb? It seems like a perfect way to offset it. But when you come to the HOA, you got
hold on. Let me unravel that. But you're saying that you're like an owner,
yeah,
and you're trying to fund your vacation by Airbnb in your own spot.
Of course,
got it.
Yeah, especially living in San Diego, it's a fantastic way to do it. You're going to go visit somewhere, maybe, I don't know, Europe. Why not fund it with especially during Comic-Con, sometime like that? Perfect timing. But when you touch on the HOA part, one of the things that you have to consider is they're going to be the local taxes that just went into effect in San Diego.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So one of them's there's a couple of different taxes that you're going to start paying. And what happens with Airbnb now is you don't do it on your own. Airbnb just takes it out for you. Full service.
So is it kind of like you talking about, like they're going to see you as a business? Is that kind of what you're talking about with the tax?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So it's cooked into the Airbnb ransom?
Yeah. I like that, the ransom.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm here all hour.
The last thing you want to consider is a San Diego business license when you're going to go into this. You want to look and see if that's going to be something you're going to want to do before you consult your HOA.
Well, what's funny about the San Diego business license, and I'm sure you guys know this from personal experience, is that they're deadly in the retroactive game.
Brutality.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's like the mafia. Like you open up a business, you're like, cool, I'm doing my thing, and all of a sudden, like 3 years later, they're like, oh yeah, by the way, you forgot about me. And then they're going to slap you with all kinds of silly fines and stuff. So you got to be proactive about that.
Yeah. Well, and it's dirt cheap to set up, too. If you do it on the front end, it's nothing.
Yeah. And that's the racket, is that you find out 3 years later, and then you got that plus all the fees. So interesting. So they're going to want their stake, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then so how does the tax thing work out? Like, you don't have to be proactive about that. It comes out of the Airbnb agreement. Is that what you're saying?
It does, but you want to make sure that you build that into your price. So if you're gonna put your home up on Airbnb and you're gonna say, let's say it's whatever it is a night, they're gonna bump it up by tax, and that's something you gotta understand that's going to happen.
I see.
But that's San Diego.
And it's relative to your rate, I would imagine, too, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. But that's San Diego. I mean, so if you live in another city, other cities don't do that. Other cities, they just kind of put the onus on you. Hey, you need to do this. You're going to need to pay this tax. Mm-hmm. So whatever your price is, now you're going to subtract your profit. You're going to subtract out the tax.
Well, you know what's really interesting about that? So shame on me. I didn't actually know that was the deal. and so that's actually a really good case for Airbnb to stick around, because that was one of the things, and we'll get to the old lady, you know, I think that has to be next segment. We talk about how this is correlating with like government issues and whatnot. But my whole question was, well, what's in it for the city?
Right.
You know, like, oh, you got the tourism thing. Okay, you know, people maybe coming here that couldn't afford to come here and stay in a hotel. Okay, maybe spawning more velocity of traveling. Okay, like got all this stuff. But like that's going to hit home. So they're actually going to have their hand in the popper.
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool.
And New York's even better. I mean, the city attorney in New York is looking big time at all the receipts for all the Airbnbs because they want their piece, and cities are catching up. They want their piece of the pie.
Makes sense. So let's get back to HOA. So let's say you share walls, right? So what are some things that you got to make sure, what questions you're asking, you might say, or documents you're pulling out to make sure you know where you stand with your HOA?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's not necessarily just shared walls either. I mean, you can be in an HOA with single-family homes.
True. Good point.
But HOAs, you know, even if they haven't taken the time to amend their CC&Rs are your governing documents for an HOA, and then you're going to also have the rules and regulations that are adopted by the board after the fact or any amendments. But you can get a copy of that from your HOA. You can request it. They have to give it to you if you're a member. So that's step number one. If you're going to go through Airbnb, go ahead and pull a copy if you don't still have it in that old file you got when you bought the house.
Yeah. Or step number 2 is call someone like Kyle so that they can actually read that stuff to you.
Yeah, it's a little
with all
dense.
the legalese.
Who are you going to call?
Well, yeah. Well, especially if it's an older HOA where the CC&Rs are
photocopies,
photocopies of a
Typewritten.
photocopies of a carbon copy that was scanned
that was microfiched and dittoed.
Yeah. I've my eyes are a little bit worse from almost a decade of looking at those things. Anyway, so you look at the HOA CC&Rs, and they will have things like occupancy, number of vehicles, and then some of the HOAs now, even before Airbnb existed, but now, especially now that Airbnb does exist, they have minimum lease terms. Where you can't lease for a period of less than 30 days or less than, a certain number of days.
This is big in the coastal communities. This is big in the heart of San Diego where our headquarters is. I mean, a lot of people, they focus on things that are important to them when they're buying the house. Like, for example, if you got a pet, like you're laser focused in on what the pet restrictions are.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, okay, go 2 domesticated animals, can't be more than 60 pounds, can't be an aggressive breed, like that kind of stuff. But you don't think about things like how many people can actually occupy the space, because you're just thinking about it for you're like, that's not on the radar.
Right.
Right? And so critical to kind of go back in and talk about that stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And the minimum lease term one is one that has gotten a lot of attention here in San Diego. There was a case 2-3 years ago. It went up on appeal before it was finally decided, but it was in one of the condo towers downtown, penthouse, that the owner was making so much money on individual short-term rentals that even though he was getting citations from the HOA,
Didn't
matter, kept doing it. And
Interesting.
And the HOA sued him. I think the final judgment was somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 when it was all said and done, with the attorney's fees and the back penalties, et cetera.
Well, you have to make an example of someone like that who is literally working the punishment right into the crime.
Yes. Well, we learn relatively early on in the practice of law that economics drive litigation. So if somebody's making enough money and it's worth their while to risk the breach, they'll do it.
Interesting.
So that's the gamble that this guy took, and I don't know whether his rental fees ended up offsetting the total cost that he had to pay in the lawsuit or not, but I know that it was a big bill at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's probably not even accounting for his legal team.
Yes.
And the process in the first place. Good. Okay, so maximum occupancy, sure. Minimum lease term. And this is an important one, too, because if it's written in, it's probably very restrictive.
Yes.
If it's in there at all, it's probably what's the probably most aggressive one you could see? I mean, the most liberal, I would say.
I normally for occupancy, you'll see 2 persons per bedroom in the property. So if it's designated as a 3-bedroom house, you would have occupancy of 6, that kind of thing.
And then the lease term.
Lease term, probably 30 days is about as tight as it gets.
Most liberal.
Yeah. The most liberal.
Yeah, 30 days is about as liberal as it gets.
Yeah.
No way Airbnb are hanging out for 30 days.
No.
It's typically a weekend at the most, maybe a week.
Yeah.
If you hit the jackpot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. So what else? What about like I guess nuisance stuff would kind of work its way back in this conversation.
Yeah, I
right?
mean, you can have some CC&Rs. I mean, it's a rare bird that you see it, but some CC&Rs will have things that kind of cross over into that noise nuisance. You'll see things like number of vehicles, and also it ties back into the occupancy, and or there will be explicit commercial restrictions in the CCNRs where you cannot use it for a commercial purpose. You'll also see some of the HOAs are now actually addressing Airbnb rentals specifically. So in some of the more recent editions, it's actually spelled into the CCNRs through an amendment.
And that's exactly what I'm imagining is going to start now, like a wave, a ripple effect out from everything we're talking about today. And the stuff that's making headlines in the news is we're going to start seeing that in the coastal communities and the downtown communities. And then, of course, that's going to be the precedent that moves its way out.
Yes.
Respectively. Gang, that's why we got Carl Yaege in the house, man. Appreciate you hanging out in the stash. You can check him out in his day job, you might say, at HickmanRobinsonLaw.com. Although, if we get you in the studio enough, man, this could be your new gig. You're making Stash Nation look real good.
Hey, I enjoy this. This is a lot of fun.
And flanked by your sidekick, Charles Williams over at Friedmanbrandon.com. That's 2 N's on Brandon. And Charles, you're going to make a big contribution. You're like the cleanup hitter. We're going to get some super number stuff going with you as we work through coming up, gang. Government issues right now. I love it because this is where the old lady from North Park's going to start playing her role. Everybody knows about that if you've been on Facebook or clicked on the news. Poor old lady. Little did she know this was going to be her 5 minutes of fame, right? And the whole political discussion. We're going to get back into little New York versus San Francisco.
Sure.
All back in the Stash Gang. Thanks for hanging out. We'll get you caught up on some sports commentary right now with our CBS affiliate, and we'll be right back on Real Talk Radio San Diego.